Hey everybody, let's go ahead and take a look here at our video on basic body organization. As we mentioned in lecture, we're going to look at some basic organizational elements of the body and then move into chemistry. So to begin, let me get out of the way here. So to begin, in this video what we're going to do is look at kind of the connection between structure and function. Does structure always tell you function? We'll consider body planes, regions, and cavities and membranes, not cavities like in your teeth. So let's begin with looking at, or kind of reminding ourselves of the level of structural organization. When we talk about this, we mean there's a hierarchy. There's a system of steps, if you will. We can go from the simplest things, the most elemental things like atoms, all the way up to the organism itself. Atoms make up molecules, molecules make up organelles, which are parts of cells, etc. But if you look at all the parts of something, does it really tell you what it does? Here's a car. Hopefully it's not yours. We have disassembled. And if you were just to look at this, does this tell you how a car works? Not necessarily. If you look at all the cells of an organism, or if you look at some tissues, it may not really tell you how it works. And there's something special then about how they're put together. So does structural organization really explain life and death? Yes and no. Atoms make up molecules, molecules make up organelles, but you don't know how a heart works by looking at some molecules. And then even the broader question is, what makes life life? Life really is due to the organization. A car really works based on its organization, but my point here is you can't just consider the parts and know how the whole thing works. Okay, that's just a little preamble as we get into some basic anatomical terminology. What we're looking at here are body planes. And this may seem like kind of a silly exercise to look at. It looks like plates of glass cutting through people, but it helps us understand when we look at different structures kind of the relation of parts to each other, and we're going to see different relationships depending upon the plane of the body we're considering. So I'm going to show you both these pictures here. We'll start here. This plane that cuts the person into a left side and a right side, you see it labeled here, is a medial or a mid-sagittal plane. And the same thing is listed here. So if we imagine a plane, if this glass, if you will, going straight down the very middle of a person, that's a mid-sagittal plane. If it were to run down the side, let me draw another line in here for you. If we were to come right down here, for example, I can't draw a straight line, but if it was not down the exact middle, but it's still along that plane, in other words, that vertical plane, that's a sagittal plane. Mid-sagittal, of course, is right in the middle. The next plane to consider is if a plane were to cut a person, if you will, into a front half and a back half. And that is a coronal plane or a frontal plane, and you see it here. So if you're separated into a front piece and a back piece, then that's a frontal plane. And when I say separate, I kind of imagine that Bubba is working at the sawmill. And if the sawmill cuts him like this, that's mid-sagittal. If it cuts him down like that, that would be a frontal plane. The last plane that you see fairly commonly referred to is this plane here. This is a transverse plane. Or you also will see horizontal plane, and you may also see cross section. So any plane that runs this direction, not very straight, that runs this direction is considered a transverse plane or a horizontal plane. One that you see less commonly, but let me give it to you anyway, is called an oblique plane. And an oblique plane is one that runs like this. It runs at an angle. So if we were consider an angle cut, it can be like this, it can be, like that. Anything that's an angle cut to the body's main axis is an oblique plane. But the three major ones are mid-sagittal, which is also called median plane, the frontal, also called coronal, and transverse or horizontal plane. Now, why does it matter? The body looks different depending on how it's cut and sliced and diced. So if you want to actually pause the video here, I'll count it down in a second, you can actually try to identify these regions and also what kind of plane was used to produce them. So ready? 3, 2, 1, Pause if you want to practice. And we're back. So, did you recognize that is a sagittal or mid-sagittal? It's kind of hard to tell if it's down the middle or not. That's a mid-sagittal plane of a female pelvis. Here is going to be a frontal plane. We kind of took off the very front layer of the thoracic region or the chest region. And then here we have the transverse plane of the head at the level of the eyes. A little more organizational terminology for you. We can refer to the regions of the body, which are just specific sections of the body. We can refer to the cervical region, referring to the neck, the lumbar region. I give you this one to show you a little more of the abdominal classifications. A lot of nursing students and nurses use this classification. If you imagine the umbilicus, the belly button is right here in the center. You can refer to the right upper quadrant region of the abdomen, left upper, etc. Or you can use, this is the one anatomists prefer, which is using 9. So you have the right lumbar region, the umbilical region, the left lumbar region, the left hypogastric, etc. But the point here is regions are just referring to a particular area of the body, which is sometimes useful to refer to if we're looking at, for example, an injury. We can say they have an abdominal injury or a scapular injury. So once again, as we did in class, we considered some basic regional anatomy. And once again, if you want to pause the video and practice this, actually I'll show you the next slide, then you can pause. You may want to spend just a minute and look at these areas. And then if you want to practice labeling some of the lines, you can do that. So here we go. Countdown. 3, 2, 1. And we're back. Finally, just about finally, let's mention cavities. There are a number of cavities in the body which are going to be isolated specific regions, kind of like rooms. So we can refer to the abdominal cavity, the orbital cavity for the eye, the oral cavity for the mouth. Ventral and dorsal cavities refer to the parts you see over here. It's a little hard to see here, but this is the dorsal cavity, which includes the cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity. It's cut off here, but this is going to be the dorsal cavity, and then this yellow region is making up the 3 ventral body cavities: thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic. But again, notice these are going to be kind of walled off sections, and we will talk about the membranes that line them in just a second. So there are a number of cavities, again, walled off rooms, and once again, please think about anatomy reflecting physiology. Why would you have cavities? We'll talk about that a little more in class. Finally, let's mention membranes. Membranes are going to be covering and lining structures, and we'll talk about the tissues that make them up. But there's 3 basic kinds of membranes that we'll be touching on in A&P. The cutaneous membrane is your skin. So its covering and lining is to cover the body surface to protect us from radiation and disease, bacteria, sunlight, water loss, etc. So the cutaneous membrane really is the skin. The mucous membranes are going to be those membranes which line body cavities that open to the exterior. So think about the reproductive tract. Think about the oral cavity, think about the nasal cavity, where there's an interaction or interface between the environment. So a different kind of tissue is going to be covering these surfaces, and these are mucous membranes. And again, when we get to histology, we'll talk about the membranes in a little bit more detail. But I want to mention the last one here. Serous membranes are those membranes that are closed to the outside world. They're closed to the exterior, and therefore, once again, even a little bit more different kind of anatomy here. You will see over and over the reference to parietal and visceral perineum, or visceral and parietal pleura, parietal and visceral pericardia. These are the main closed off cavities, and the parietal and the visceral refer to layers of the serous membranes. But the biggest distinction about serous membranes to focus on is these membranes line cavities that don't have a direct opening to the exterior, where things like nasal and mucous and reproductive do. That's it for this video. If you need to go back and look at it again, might be a good idea. You might want to practice a little bit too. Once you've watched the video and feel comfortable with it, you can take the quiz on body planes and basic body organization. Thank you.